Hi, folks. It's Dr. Christine Sauer, and welcome to Learning Controversial Conversations. To be completely honest, this is the first event of this kind for me, and maybe also for you. So expect imperfection, please, because we are learning this together, right? So here's why I thought this may be important to try. I noticed that in the last few years, people have started to drift away more and more. Groups have felt more divided than ever. People are more unhappy with life in all areas. Did you guys notice a similar trend?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, go ahead, Ian.
No, I don't have anything other to add other than I agree with you. I think that's a valid assessment.
So thank you both for that. And so here's why I'm doing this, because I decided that I needed to learn to have better conversations. I've worked in healthcare, as you know, for over 40 years, online as a mental health and brain health coach for over 10. And I thought, with all the training and exercise, and I should be perfect at this, right? But I'm not. Just ask my husband, he'll roll his eyes. So I found this book on difficult conversations by the Harvard Negotiation Project. And then I found the TEDx talk that I linked in the event. And then I watched a video by Joan Peterson about slave, tyrant, or negotiator. What is your choice? And it really made me think even more. And
Mm.
as you know, I happen to be really good at tech, at building and at connecting systems, and so things like that. So why shouldn't I start it? In a way, I felt that God called me to at least try to help the situation in a little tiny way. So here I am taking the first baby step. Thank you for being there. So if you're watching that video later in the recording, please use this platform, watch it, subscribe, or this will perish like other things that did before. And as always, when one thing doesn't work, there's the next to try, right? When one door, another one opens. When one door closes, another one opens, right? So thanks you for listening to a mini version of my journey. Now let's share your journey if you want to. So I invite those who want to take about 2 minutes each to introduce yourself and share how you arrived here and what you're hoping to learn and get out of it or contribute. Thanks. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I'm Gary Daniel. I'm Christine's business partner, and I have been working with Christine now for quite a while, about a year and a half, I would say, and we're building something great. And I have a corporate background, 35 years in some very large companies that I was in sales and marketing roles, and I went through a major lifestyle transformation in 2020 during the events that were going on at that time, where I left my career and had to reinvent myself. And my health was in decline. So that's where I started. I was way overweight, 80 pounds, which I've dropped and kept off since then. Learned a lot about myself, reconnected with myself, got into some health and life coaching after I had some success in those areas on my journey, and I wanted to share that with others and help others. And along the way, during that time, I had a lot of difficult conversations, and it's definitely an area that I think is important to work on and to learn to have these conversations. But what I think I found during that time is a lot of those conversations for me are kind of unnecessary to even engage, being as a lot of the hot button topics, controversial topics, are more of a distraction than anything. A lot of these polarizing type of topics are there to keep us distracted, in my opinion. So I try to focus on the areas that are important to me, like growing and achieving goals that I set for myself and helping others achieve their goals. So that's where I spend a lot of my focus now. So I thought this would be interesting and a learning experience because I think it's important for people to be able to have different viewpoints and be able to disagree um, with each other, but in a cordial manner, right? We don't have to get upset and dislike each other over our viewpoints and escalate in a negative way. So I think it's important to try to have these conversations in a way that we can hear each other out and agree to disagree. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Gary. Yeah, and want to
Hi,
say,
folks. I'm Ian McFicker. I'm a retired Canadian Armed Forces officer. I live with post-traumatic stress disorder and a number of other health conditions. And along my path, I've had the opportunity to have some very difficult conversations, both within the military and tense standoffs with weapons, to even things like the career development of difficult peers and subordinates. And I've been on the receiving end of, I guess, constructive criticism from my superiors from time to time. And I guess the main thing I've taken from that background is that I try to remove emotion from a tense situation as soon as I can. And that can be done in a number of ways. And I look to do two things. The first of which is to try and see if we understand the situation in a similar manner and even have a similar understanding of certain words used in the conversation. And then if I notice that things are starting to heat up, I'm very careful to not pour gasoline on a small fire, not to make things worse, and to try to de-escalate the situation such that we can restart from a common point of view. Along my path, I have become a trauma-informed yoga therapy certified teacher, a trauma-informed mindfulness teacher, and I currently work part-time as a fitness instructor. I taught a strength training class this morning. I participated in an aquafit class. I'm also an aquafit teacher, and I am a strength training teacher, a yoga teacher, and I try to bring that approach of being non-judgmental and clarifying understandings of situations in everything that I do. Because even as a fitness instructor from time to time, you can run into clients who are not happy with you and wish to share their opinion of how you could be doing your job better. And I find a smile, a bit of humor is very good at sort of trying to snuff out those little fires of disagreement before they become too big. And I'd be happy to add a little bit more later as we go along and it fits the context.
oh, that is amazing. Both of you are, I know you both for a while and in part quite well, and you know what I am about, and I respect you highly. And we definitely dissent in some points, but we still respect each other. And I think that's a very desirable outcome. And both of you mentioned very important points and that I want to summarize and let me know if I got that right. Number one, Gary mentioned that often controversial conversations or fighting about things, arguing about things, are a distraction from things that matter most, right, Gary? And
Yes.
I couldn't agree more with that. I've seen that so often, especially in politics. They fight about little things that don't matter at all and then push something that really matters under the table until it's done and too late to actually discuss in a constructive way. I've seen that happen and it's not helpful. And it's important to set in the chief goal, you said, Gary, right?
Correct.
And this is
Yes.
fascinating. And it's important to be able to disagree without eating each other for lunch or hating each other, right? And I agree with that too. And that is exactly what makes people to get along, right? And Ian, I heard you say that it's important to clarify words that are used. And I found, as English is my second language, that I very often have to research words that are used to get a meaningful context. Especially English is such a wordy language. I read somewhere that, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but that English has the most words in the world of all languages. They're not used all the time, but it does have them. So I constantly run across words that I never heard before, or I read a word and I say, what does that really mean? And the nuances, I think, especially people where English is a second language, uh, can make a difference for native speakers and lead to a miscommunication between people where English is a second language, mostly immigrants and such, and native English speakers. And I think that's a very important point to address. Thank you. And I love also not pour gasoline on the fire. Don't
Yeah,
make,
and I'd like to emphasize that I said don't pour gasoline on a small fire, which means don't let the difficult conversation rage out of control too early. So the idea is that you try to douse the fire or tame it at an early stage in the discussions. When things start to look like they're starting to drift into an emotional tangent.
that's a really important issue that most people fail at, me included, because at some point, when it's an issue that affects us personally, especially in a relationship, right, we get emotional. We are affected emotionally, and we know we are right. At least I know I'm right? My husband disagrees, of course, with that. And that can lead to heated discussions. And at some point, somebody has to step back and say, okay, what went wrong here? And things like that are bound to happen. And I'm very interested to hear how you would address such a involuntary disagreement that happens because you're emotionally over involved, which happens all the time. That's a good point. And maybe some discussions need some gasoline to fully burn them up, but that's another thing. Being non-judgmental, that's an important issue. Is that even possible?
Well,
That's
one
a
thing
tough
I'd like
one.
to add, Christine, which I found very helpful, you're aware from our friendship that I'm severely hearing disabled. And as a result of that, sometimes it helps me if I feel the conversation is starting to drift toward an emotional tangent, is to identify the fact I'm hearing impaired and ask the person if they'd mind clarifying what they mean. And I may actually have heard the full context of the conversation, but it's a very useful tool sometimes to just take a step back to say, am I understanding you correctly? Would you mind saying that again so that I fully understand what you mean? And given my hearing impairment, I also have to watch people's faces, and that also gives me some cues as to whether or not things are starting to become a little bit more emotional than is needed at that moment in the conversation. And I would offer that that particular little step can be valuable for anyone, even if they have full hearing capability, is to just offer an opportunity for a pause to say, would you mind saying that again so I can really be sure that I understand what you mean? And that offers a sense of respect for their point of view, even if you disagree with it.
Hmm. I love that. That is very true. And I try to do that as often as I think about it.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, anytime you can take a step back and pause, breathe, remember to breathe because we forget to breathe so often, right? I mean, we breathe and it's just shallow and we don't take the time to really breathe, right? And reset and regulate. our body, because you feel your heart rate elevate, and then you start getting a little more passionate about the topic, and that's when you get that tension coming. And one thing I think I've learned, or it's helped me with a few things, having these types of conversations. And one big part of that was teaching me to learn to listen more, let other people speak, and actually listen to what they're saying, not waiting to talk and say what I want to say, but actually hearing what they're telling me, take it in, and to ask questions, more questions, to get to the root of their belief. Why do they think the way they do? And have them explain it. And a lot of times is you ask those questions and you can see when they're answering those questions, sometimes a light bulb comes on and they see things differently when they hear it coming out of their mouth. And then that kind of maybe changes their thinking a little bit, or maybe they're more open to your viewpoint. So I think that's helped me a lot in those areas, because I used to I was like waiting to talk. I wanted to make my point. And also another thing was I used to come, I would take those conversations as if I was maybe in a courtroom, right, as a lawyer or something, and argumentative and wanting to be right. And I realized I don't have to be right, or I don't have to prove to them that I'm right, because not everybody's going to see it the way I do. So I can be happy enough with just knowing what I know and what I believe, and they can believe what they want, and we can both still be happy and enjoy each other's company, right? We don't have to hate each other or get angry. So,
Yeah, I agree with you, Gary. And one of the things I'd like to offer as someone who deals with a degree of cognitive impairment due to my hearing disability and possibly other invisible injuries is that we have to really try to be non-judgmental, not only in the sense of not judging the other person's perspective, but taking a step back and really just, as you described, letting them talk. Because in some circumstances, if you have, for example, ADHD or other perceptual challenges, that urge to jump in and add your point of view can be almost overpowering. And as someone with cognitive impairment, I know there's times when I'm following a conversation, and if the person is moving their head from side to side so I can't see their face, or they are talking more quickly, especially in my a second or third language, I find I often will lose track of the conversation, and my instinct is to jump in and add my point of view. But I have to haul myself back and say, no, let them complete whatever they're trying to explain. And then I can circle around back and say, would you mind telling me that again so I really understand what you're saying? Because that urge from many people, whether it's just they want to get their point in or they actually have to get their point in because they're going to forget it, is something we should all be aware of. And I am prone to that at times, that if I'm in a very dynamic, fast-moving conversation, that maybe I'm going to lose the thread. And but rather than jump in and assert my will, so to speak, I really, really have to try, and I'm not always successful, of just trying to hold that point and then come back to it and ask them to restate what they've said.
No, thank you, Ian. That's a very good point. And I have the same issue with my drug-induced ADHD brain damage. I
Yeah.
can forget during a conversation. Right now, I wouldn't know what you said. And I use a tool. I use a piece of paper. I write down notes during when somebody else is speaking. That allowed me to stop that impulse that I have to say it right now because otherwise I forgot something that was so important that I had to interrupt them. And in the end, most of the time, it's not that important when you look back. But when I have it on a note, that allows me to actually stay focused on the conversation and then later go back and say, okay, is that so important? Do I really want to say something about it or just let it go? For example, Gary said something that I found really enlightening and that I do want to add something to. You said that sometimes people feel attacked during an argument. And I think that Gary means, what Ian means with a non-judgmental is to remove that step that triggers the feeling of an attack, the personal attack. It's mostly that you're attacking the person. What an idiot you are, right? That kind of an attack from the conversation. And that, of course, leads to the complete stress cascade, right? Fear, freeze, run, attack. And that makes everything more emotional. And in the end, for a peaceful conversation, can make that impossible. So, very good point. Oh, I love that conversation. Thank you so much. I'm learning already.
I've used that technique as well, Christine, of taking notes to keep track of a conversation. And one thing I find helpful, if you know you have a tendency to interrupt conversations due to ADHD or other perceptual challenges, or in my case, hearing challenge, working memory, whatever, is it helps, especially if you're going to see this person on a routine basis, to self-identify that you have a problem with your perception and your cognition following conversations. And if they know that, they will, in most cases, give you the benefit of the doubt, and they won't think you're just being deliberately rude. And I've had to use that tactic in Zoom calls in particular, where in order to get your press the button to talk or whatever, sometimes you feel that you must jump in. But if the people you're working with, if it's a small enough group and they know you have that challenge, they will give you the benefit of the doubt, or they will even circle around back in the conversation to bring you in if it looks like you haven't had an opportunity to speak for a while.
Now, Zoom has those wonderful features where you can raise a virtual hand, and
Yes.
very helpful when you have a conversation where things go wrong. And I had actually group meetings that I tried with other people that went terribly wrong because I didn't really know how to rein down people that try to take over the whole group and dominate. And that can be very harmful for other participants and the success of the group as a whole. And you certainly know that, Ian and Gary. That's excellent. So,
Could I
what?
add one more point here, Christine? I was just thinking of a conversation I had about 2 weeks ago in a volunteer group where I have a leadership position. I'm the vice president, and the president was having some difficulty in controlling the discussions. And there was one particular member who monopolized the conversation for far longer than was appropriate for the circumstance. And often what happens if you give a person a bit of a platform to explain their point, once they've given their point, they will often back off. But this particular person was not doing that. They just kept getting angrier and angrier and getting more and more emotional. And after the meeting, the president and I talked, and he said, "How would you have handled that?" And I said, "Well, if I was in that circumstance, I think what I would do is I would sort of give the person the impression that they had been heard, but at the same time, cut off further discussion and disruption of the meeting in a manner something like this." And I'm going to use the name Christine just to have a name. Well, Christine, that's a really important point, but I think I'd like to take that offline with you and develop that a bit further and then bring it back to the group in a more condensed form. Something like that. That way you let them know you respect them, you understand their point of view, but maybe you need to develop your depth of understanding of their position a bit further, which necessitates having a private meeting. And that way you can really boil down the problem and then perhaps bring it back to the group in a more condensed manner, rather than having somebody run away with the conversation during the meeting.
That's a very good point, Ian. And it also has the effect that the person doesn't feel attacked or embarrassed, or even worse, by the leader if they cut him off and say, "That's enough. You talked to you over the time that's allotted. You were taking everybody's time." Then they are offended, right? And
Well, this is it. And because my inside voice and his inside voice, and I'm sure many other people's inside voice was saying something to the effect of, "Shut up 5 minutes ago." But in order to show respect for the person and demonstrate that they had been heard, we had to get a means of trying to rein in the person, but at the same time not insult the person or tell them that their issue was not worthy of further discussion.
I think you just answered the question. How do you politely say shut up in a group meeting?
Well, that's
Yeah,
one way.
Edith's
That's one way
approach.
I do it.
I like that approach. That's a great approach. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was serving in the military, it depended on the circumstances. If I was in a superior position, I could simply look at the person and order them to shut up. But that does not work in most normal conversations. So you
Right.
have
We
to
don't have
find
that
a way
luxury.
of showing respect for the person and their perspective. And I found that tactic, and I will call it a tactic, of saying this is so important that we better discuss this privately is a good way to give yourself an off ramp in a difficult group conversation.
Gary, I have a question for you, and maybe Ian has an idea too. What do you think of meeting timers? In Zoom, it's very easy to put a meeting timer on and say everybody has 2 minutes to speak, and then I'm cutting off the mic if you go over the time. There's a German saying you can talk about everything but not over the time, which in German means longer than allotted time. And sometimes it's really true. And in Toastmasters, I went to Toastmasters, and I think most of you did too, you learn actually how to package what you want to say, your idea, in a certain time frame, which is a very valuable skill. Would you agree?
I think so. I think that could be very helpful, especially when you're having these types of conversations, the difficult ones, the controversial ones. It allows for people to be able to speak and everyone else to be able to listen. And that way you don't have people trying to talk over each other, because that's what you get a lot of times when people start getting really passionate, right? And they're trying to talk over each other, kind of like what we talked about. People are waiting to talk and make their point before they forget it. And they're so anxious to get it out that they start talking over the other person, and nobody really can hear what's going on. So I think that's pretty helpful to have timers set, so you can have everybody gets their time to speak and gets the stage, gets the floor for their allotted time, and then respond after you've taken everything in. And I think that could be good for these types of situations.
I think it's very helpful as well. But I'd like to add, I think it works best when you've given the group a warning that that's the structure of the meeting. I'm a member of a number of volunteer organizations, and in some of those organizations, people will self-censor and they will stay within the time limits. And then there are other organizations, particularly where you're discussing more emotional issues, perhaps with people who are dealing with either cognitive challenges or emotional mental health challenges. And sometimes they need that little bit of extra time to fully explain what their point of view is. So as long as it's clear and it's a group in which those rules are agreed to, I think it will work well. And you can even use it in a group that has not been exposed to it, but you may have to reinforce it several times in subsequent meetings until everyone really accepts it.
I agree. So one of the very difficult things, and that's what I help actually as a coach people do, and every coach does it more or less effectively, is helping clients shift their viewpoint, given their consent to be shifted, of course, which is different from an argument, to feel better, do better, and be more successful in life and be more successful in achieving their goal. So just think about, and if you're listening to that, please think about it too. Think about a time you changed your mind on a deeply held view, and what specifically helped you shift.
Yes. I think for me, when that has happened, it's happened because I sought out more information, right? Getting more information, digging deeper beyond the surface, finding out really everything you can about the topic, I guess, and not just using surface level ideas, always digging a little deeper into it. And I like to try to become curious and ask questions of the other person. Be curious about why they think the way they do. So then I can understand it better, where they're coming from.
That last comment just gave me a thought about a popular television program, Gary, called Ted Lasso. And Ted Lasso's catchphrase of "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think that's a good attitude to take when you're in those circumstances. Is rather than get into the, I guess, the argumentative, antagonistic process, as you referred to in a courtroom, just sort of haul back and try to be curious about what led this person to that position. And
Yes.
in your questions, show that honest curiosity of what led you to this.
Right.
And by the way, there's another phrase by Dr. Amen that is similar. He says, "Be curious, not furious," which is a nice wording. I like it because it rhymes. And it says the same thing, be curious, not furious. Because if somebody is judgmental, they feel attacked and get angry. Furious.
Yeah, I agree, Christine. Plus, I would add, if someone does appear to be judgmental, they are often working from a pre-established bias, and you're going to lead to issues with the anchor effect, where they feel they have to defend that position, and it's very hard to move them away from it once they've cemented themselves in there.
That's a good point. So I have two suggestions. Number one, of course, I want to present a little bit about this book because I find it very helpful for people that have difficult conversation and sometimes struggle with that to learn it. I'm still learning from it, even for my relationship, to become a better communicator. And in the end, it's not about winning an argument. And I like Jordan Peterson, he calls it slave, tyrant, or negotiator. You have to be one of the three. So I don't want to be a tyrant and get my way in all cases. It's not helpful. I don't want to be a slave in the sense that other people can impose their will on me all the time. I like to be a negotiator, which is really a life skill that should be taught in elementary school or before, but isn't. And I think it's quite important. And of course, we can always disagree with people, and that's fine. I never have a problem with somebody that calmly disagrees with me. And even if they disagree with me not calmly, I sometimes said, there's no way to offend me because it's my choice whether I am offended, whether I let anybody offend me. As long as they use words, they cannot offend me, in my opinion. Because I can just say, well, whatever, it's your opinion. I'm not offended. I choose not to be offended. It's my choice, not your choice. And I think it's important because you also say judgmental. Yeah, I agree. But even if somebody is judgmental, it's still our choice to be offended. And there we get in a topic that at some point I would love to discuss, the problem of freedom of expression and free speech. That's currently a hot topic in Canada. But we are not getting there today, I would say, unless somebody really wants to. It's certainly a hot topic.
That is a hot topic, and I think it's important that we're having this conversation because um, these topics don't have to be so hot, right? I mean, we have different viewpoints, and we can discuss them and learn from each other. Sometimes you learn from people you disagree with, and you see things in a different light. And that's why I want to be curious and ask those questions. I want to know the why behind their thinking. Why do they think this? And how did they get there? And, a lot of times it has to do with their background and things they've experienced, right? Which we're all different. So it's important to ask those questions, hear them out, and then be able to learn from that. And sometimes we become enlightened ourselves, from somebody we disagree with. So dialogue is important.
So just let me ask you, what would you guys like to discuss? We have about 15 minutes left before we have to wrap up. What would
I'd
you
like
like?
to hear more about the book.
Okay, let's get started on the book, because this book is a New York Times best-selling book about the difficult conversations, how to discuss what matters most. The authors are Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. This is the cover. They are part of the Harvard negotiation project, and I had no idea what that was. I bought it because it was a #1 bestseller, New York Times bestseller, and it was recommended on Amazon, and I thought, well, that may be a good book, and it actually was. With books, sometimes you read a book and you say, well, that was waste of money, and sometimes you read a book and you say, that was the best book I ever read. I had that experience a few times in my life, and I'm sure you guys did too. So let's read the preface press to the third edition. Very interesting. Third edition. 25 years have passed since the initial publication of Difficult Conversation, and to our, now that's the author's delight, people continue to find the insights and advice helpful. Much has changed in the world since then. Social media presents many new societal and interpersonal challenges. Political polarization is rampant. The value of democracy itself is no longer a given for many in the world. Awareness of historical injustices and their legacy is woven more deeply into public discourse, and the earth itself is heating up. The world seems both a smaller and more fragile place. The need for productive learning conversations is greater than ever. Gil, do you have the book too? If you
I
want,
do, yes.
if you
I think
want,
I'm just barely getting into it too. I'm a few pages in, barely started it actually.
because I
So
know I'm a pretty good reader, but my English pronunciation is far from perfect. So if I grossly mispronounce something, please both of you correct me, because I learned from that. I would appreciate that. I never mind being corrected. I like being right, but I don't mind being corrected. In this edition, the authors, of course, have updated and added examples, extended some discussions, and reorganized a few to address more of the challenging context, dilemmas, and questions relevant to readers today. Supplementing our own ongoing research, our readers, colleagues, students, and clients have been an invaluable source of ideas, advice, and critique. While the basic framework remains, we hope these edits and additions help readers to apply the ideas to the diverse challenges in their own lives. To keep the book as accessible and short as possible, we continue to eschew most footnotes and references other than key dates noted in the acknowledgments. By the way, this book comes as an audiobook, and I enjoy listening to it as an audiobook. In addition, because when I do dishes or something else repetitive, I always want to listen to something that makes it enjoyable. Any activity, even cleaning the house, which is not my forte. The underlying research base has greatly expanded in recent decades, with results that continue to enrich our understanding of the underpinnings of the framework. We recognize that knowing more about this research would be helpful to many readers. We think the best way to meet this need is with an online resource that can be updated more frequently than the text. So new with this edition, readers can find an annotated resource and reference listing at a list in the book, link in the book. A brief word about the language in the examples. A number of readers have observed, nobody talks like the people in your examples. It doesn't sound natural. Fair enough. To some extent, this is because learning conversations on hot topics remain more the exception than the rule, so role models are not that common. So here's our chance, become a role model. That's one of my goals. I like to be a role model. And you'll never be a perfect role model.
I like that as a goal, and I have the same one. I do. I want to be a role model and set a good example for others always. So I think that's important.
You know, I like when people say aim up, always
Yes.
to go higher. That's why I wrote the video about the 7 steps to climb the mountain of life, because it's a constant climb upwards. And I like the climb idea because it's hard sometimes. Life can be very hard. A brief or so some extent, this is because learning conversations remain more, I said that. But also, when we model a dialogue in this book, we use the terminology of the 3 conversations framework to be as clear as possible about what the concepts mean and how you may use them. Once you become familiar with the concept, you can and should use language that feels natural to you and others in your family, organization, or culture. You don't need to say some things you've said have been surprising. If you know that saying, dang, I had no idea, will communicate the same message more naturally. Whatever words we use, our difficult conversations are always impacted by who we are and how we are seen by others. Each of us has different stories and perceptions of personal, familiar, and societal history, different hopes for and assumptions about the future. Our perceptions and experiences also shape our sense of psychological safety, of what it means for something to feel fair, and of the extent to we feel efficacious, heard, and seen. We've tried to take account of such differences, but we are limited by space, the broad subject matter, and by the inherent constraints of our own perspectives, as different as they are from one another. While we have worked with and learned from many people whose experiences and challenges are different from our own and continue to be so, the 3 of us are nevertheless, among other things, white American, able-bodied, and from the generations that came of age in the 70s and 80s. And these aspects of our identities and experience have no doubt shaped us, if not always in ways a given stereotype may predict. Where readers have questions, we hope they will seek out additional resources and advice on topics of interest or concern. We'll end on a personal note. It's fair to wonder where we stand on the idea that while nothing makes hard conversations easy, certain skills really help. Have we gotten 25 years better at having difficult conversations? In many ways, yes. But each of the authors in our own way has learned that every phase of life brings its own set of new difficult conversations, its own unforeseen burdens, tests, and twists. Even after countless experiences and much learning, our own difficult conversations still sometimes feel, well, difficult. We continue to lean on the skills here. They remain essential for getting us through our own challenges. The goal isn't to get our 10,000 hours in so that you become an expert and graduate out of the difficulty. That hasn't happened for us in any event. The goal is to be a little better tomorrow, or at least try to be. And if you aren't, to be a little better the day after that. So if you struggle with difficult conversations, join the club. We'll be there to greet you. You may think it's a club you'd rather avoid, but we think you should reconsider. It's only in this club of beautifully flawed humans that you'll find meaningful consolation, compassion, assistance, and sometimes forgiveness. You've already been invited to join, to accept. You need only acknowledge your own frailty, and as we say in the introduction, your own resilience. We imagine that in these last 25 years, you, like us, the authors, have experienced your share of both. Thank you again to our students, clients, and colleagues, and the many readers who write to share their experiences and questions. We learn from each of you and hope you continue to be in touch. Isn't it gorgeous?
It's good. I like it.
Now,
Christine, I found that very interesting, but I was wondering if you might elaborate a bit further on what the authors call the three conversation framework.
they will introduce that in the introduction. And I'll just give a little preview because the three conversation framework, that's chapter 1 actually, sort out the three conversation. I'll just give a little preview about it. The first conversation is, let me see, decoding. The what happened conversation. Most difficult conversation involve disagreement about what has happened or what should happen. Who said what and who did what? Who's right, who meant what, and who's to blame? The second one is a feelings conversation. Every difficult conversation also asks and answers questions about feelings. Are my feelings valid, appropriate? Should I acknowledge or deny them, put them on the table or check them at the door? What do I do about the other person's feelings? What if they are angry or feel hurt? Now, they give a lot of examples in the first chapter, and I'm looking forward to doing that maybe next week, if you're willing to come and continue that conversation, because I find it very interesting. And for me, the structure is always learn, do, teach, and all three at the same time. So I'm learning here. The third conversation that they mention is the identity conversation. And this is a conversation we each have with ourselves about what this situation means to us. We conduct an internal debate over whether this means we are competent or incompetent, a good person or a bad person, worthy of love or unlovable. What impact might it have on our self-image and self-esteem, our future, and our well-being? Our answers to these questions determine in large part whether we feel balanced during the conversation or whether we feel off-center and anxious. And they give again examples, and then they go on what we can change and what we can. And that's always a very important question to answer. Is what we are trying to address something that we even can change? And is it even worth talking about it? That's, I think, what you
Right.
meant.
Yeah, I think that's important. A lot of times, we get into these conversations and they get heated and tense, and really there's no favorable outcome. We have no control over the topic or the outcome of the topic. So it's like, why are we engaging in the first place?
Here's an example of an absolute futile debate. Is the color red better or is the color blue better? What do you think?
Right.
It may be helpful to use it to study, debate, and imagine there was a difference, just to train it with an unemotional topic. But I think every reasonable adult would say, well, it's just two different colors, right? And I think it's a good example, really, for most things that we put out there. They're just not worth debating over. Do you want
Right. There's so
to
many things we can't control or change, right? We can't control it, we can't change it, and we're just arguing viewpoints at that point. So is that productive? I don't know.
What do you think, Ian?
I'm thinking I enjoyed listening to your reading the preface because aside from the allusion to the three conversations framework, which you just explained, I also liked their axiom that the intent of the book is not to make you an expert at difficult conversations after 10,000 hours, but to be a little bit better at how you handle difficult conversations tomorrow. And I thought that is really good advice. And I was thinking of that old axiom that you're probably familiar with. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So the idea is not to become an expert just by reading the book, but to think on these things, reflect on your own behavior, and how you might be a little bit better day by day in holding difficult conversations.
Thank you, Ian. I couldn't agree more. I find many people these days read a book without implementing what the book says. And I think that's often the most important action you can take. Some books are really great works of self-help literature that are worth implementing. And I find when I work with clients and I recommend one of those books to them, they sometimes tell me, yeah, I read it. And I said, okay, what did you do as a consequence of reading it? What did you identify as one issue that you want to start with? Oh, I didn't think about that. They don't think when they're reading. Maybe it's an inability to understand written content. That's a possibility. So I thought, give them a video about it too. Maybe that helps. And let's discuss that between people that are reasonable people like us three here.
I like that point, Christine. And in one area, instance, I really see that often is the Bible. How many people read the Bible? Do they actually implement what they read and learn in there? Are they living it? Are they practicing it daily? Or are they just reading it to say they read it? It's like you got to put it into practice, right?
Well, the big
And
Bible offers, because first you need to understand what it really is, what the Bible says. There's so much symbolism involved, and it's hard for our current time, 2000 years later, to really understand what the Bible says sometimes. And I struggle with that, and I love Jordan Peterson, who breaks it down in language that some people can understand. It's still not simple language, but I like the way he breaks it down. You can agree with him or disagree, obviously. But when he talks about it, things start making sense for me. When he talked about how Israel was led out of the desert and spent 40 years in the desert and why that was necessary, and how he relates that to suffering, the topic of suffering. And oh my God, it made so much sense to me. And I thought, I never thought about it that way. And this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I know many people are looking for that feeling. I never thought about it that way, because that's when people change.
Yeah, there's a number of layers in this conversation. If you accept the Bible as it's written in 20th or 21st century English, that's one level of understanding. But you can go back even further and say, okay, is the translation from ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, or Latin, or early English accurate? So there's a number of ways you can dissect how information is being presented. And was it even an accurate translation of some of the original words? And I'm thinking of a number of ways of describing the totality of reality. In the English version of the Old Testament, they say God created the heavens and the earth. And the reason that's coming from the ancient Hebrew translation, in the New Testament, the word universe is used. The difference is in ancient Hebrew, which only had something like 4,000 to 5,000 words, they didn't have a word for universe. So the term, the heavens and the earth, was used to describe the totality of their reality as they perceived it. Whereas 2,000 years later, the New Testament written in Aramaic and then Greek, the word universe was common. And the universe, of course, is a much broader concept. So you have to sort of start, what are your starting points? What do the words mean? What is the etymology or meaning of words?
Right, and it's very complex. And I would love to have more conversations actually around this topic too, maybe on a separate show where we look at somebody else breaking it down. There's lots of great videos on YouTube, not just by Jordan Peterson about biblical concepts, but I listened to a talk by a Franciscan monk. Boy, that was interesting. Some people know so much more than myself, and I love learning from them.
I'd like to recommend Dr. Hugh Ross, who is a astrophysicist at Caltech in the United States. He's originally from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, and he was trained at the University of British Columbia and the University of Toronto, where he did his PhD. But he has worked throughout his entire career at Caltech in California, and he was the one from whom I got that little bit of etymology, talking about the difference in words and how an ancient language, which only had less than 5,000 words, um, can't necessarily explain things well, as you alluded to, Christine. English with its 5 million words. And we
Oh,
have to sometimes look a little bit deeper at the roots of what is being said before we even begin to absorb the message.
absolutely true. Gathering information, as Gary mentioned before. Ian, do me a favor. I don't know the spelling of his name, and I would like to look him up. How do you spell Dr. Uras?
His first name is U, and that's spelled H as in hotel, U as in uniform, G as in golf, and H as in hotel. Space, last name, Ross, R as in Romeo, O as in Oscar, S as in Sierra, S as in Sierra.
Thank you. I would have never found him.
You're welcome. He's quite prevalent on YouTube.
Yeah, I think I even have read of him, but from your pronunciation, I took it down as Yuraz.
No, no.
Totally
He's
wrong.
Scottish background Canadian. Both his names, first name and last name, are Scottish.
How do I know? So I'm glad I asked.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no
That's
worries.
a classic example of when it's necessary to ask.
Exactly.
So that's an hour. Thank you so much for participating, and I hope we can do that again because I enjoyed it greatly, and I hope somebody that watches it will also be interested in it. If you do, subscribe to the channel and let us know what you think. Comment on it or tell us something that you think we should discuss besides what's better, red or blue.